All right, welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be tackling a pretty hefty topic. We're diving into the world of English language teaching. And don't worry, even if you've never taught a day in your life, I think there's going to be a lot here for you.
Oh, definitely. We're going to be exploring Jeremy Harmer's The Practice of English Language Teaching, which, well, it's kind of a Bible in the field.
Yeah, for sure. It's a huge book. It covers a really wide range of stuff. We're talking about the history of English teaching, different learning styles, classroom management techniques, you name it. But the cool thing is, a lot of these insights, they go way beyond just the classroom. They
Yeah.
can apply to learning any skill, really, or even just thinking about how we communicate with each other in everyday life.
Right, exactly. So our mission today is to kind of distill some of the key takeaways from Harmer's work and see what they can teach us about language, about learning, and about, connecting with other people.
Sounds good. So I guess a natural place to start is with the language itself, right? English. It's well, it's kind of a big deal globally.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, even back in like 1985, you had something like 320 to 380 million native speakers. And then on top of that, another 250 to 350 million using it as a second language. Those numbers are just huge.
Yeah, and of course they've only grown since then, right? I mean, think about how many people around the world are learning English right now. It's become the language of, well, so many things, international business, science, travel, the internet. It really is a lingua franca.
It is. It's like this common ground that people from all different backgrounds can use to communicate with each other. And one of the things that Harmer points out, which I found really fascinating, is how this global use of English has actually shaped the language itself.
How so?
Well, he talks about how English has this amazing ability to just absorb words from other languages. Think about words like, bank, computer, hamburger. Those words originated in other languages, but now they're so common in English that we don't even think about it.
That's true. It's almost like English is constantly evolving and adapting as it comes into contact with new cultures and new ways of speaking.
Right, exactly. And it's not just borrowing words either. There are so many different varieties of English spoken around the world. You've got British English, American English, Australian English, Indian English, and countless others. And each of these varieties has its own unique features, like differences in pronunciation, vocabulary, and even grammar.
Yeah, it's kind of like English is this big, diverse family, right?
Mhm.
And while all the members share some common traits, they each have their own personality and quirks. Like, for example, calling an apartment a flat or an elevator a lift.
Exactly. And so one of the big questions that comes up when you're teaching English as a foreign language is, like, which variety do you teach? What's considered correct or standard?
Right. I mean, can you really say that one variety is better than another?
It's a tricky question. And Harmer actually talks about this idea of appropriate models of English. Like
Yeah.
there's this growing recognition that maybe trying to make everyone sound like a native speaker from, say, London or New York isn't always realistic or even desirable.
Yeah, I mean, it's more important to be able to communicate effectively, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of which specific variety you're using.
Right. And there's even this kind of intriguing concept of a trilingual English world
Mm.
that Harmer talks about. It's this idea that people might end up using different varieties of English depending on the context. So, like, maybe you use your local variety at home, a more formal national standard in school or at work, and then a kind of international standard when you're communicating with people from other countries.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So we've talked about, the global reach of English and its many different forms, but now let's zoom in a bit and talk about how we actually describe the language, right? The building blocks of it, grammar and vocabulary. Where do we even begin with that?
Well, I think it's helpful to start with the idea that grammar is basically like a set of rules that govern how we put words together to create meaning.
Right, like the subject verb object structure that we use in English.
Exactly. Those kinds of structures are what allow us to form sentences that make sense. And Harmer points out that even though we might not be consciously aware of these rules when we're speaking, they're still operating in the background.
Yeah. But of course, real life language is always messier than what you find in a grammar textbook, right? I mean, think about how people actually talk. We don't always speak in perfectly formed sentences.
Right. We leave words out, we interrupt each other, we use slang and idioms. And Harmer talks about this idea of ellipsis, which is basically when we omit words that are understood from the context. So, like, if
Yeah.
someone asks, want a coffee,
Hmm.
you might just say, sure, instead of yes, I would like a coffee.
Right, we shorten things up. And it still makes sense.
It does. And it's all part of what makes language so flexible and adaptable. And speaking of how language is actually used, Harmer also talks about this fascinating tool called computer corpora.
Okay, that's a type.
It's basically like a giant database of real-world language. So like millions and millions of words from books, articles, websites, conversations, all sorts of stuff. And researchers can use these corpora to analyze how language is actually being used in different contexts.
Interesting. So it's like taking a snapshot of the language as it's actually being used rather than just relying on dictionaries and grammar rules.
Exactly. And one of the things that corpora can tell us is which words tend to go together. Like Harmer gives the example of the word pain. If you look at corpus, you'll see that it often occurs with words like in, feel, cause, and inflict. So give you a much richer understanding of how a word is actually used beyond just its basic definition.
Yeah, I see that. It's about seeing how words work together in practice, not just in isolation. And then, of course, there's vocabulary itself. There are so many ways to categorize and think about words and how they relate to each other.
Right. Like there's this idea of hyponymy and superordination. It's basically about how words fit into hierarchies of meaning. So like a banana is a type of fruit, and fruit is a type of food.
Okay, yeah, it's like those categories and subcategories you see in, like, a biology textbook.
Exactly. And understanding these relationships can be really helpful for learning vocabulary because it allows you to see the connections between words and how they fit into a larger system of meaning.
Right, and it's not just about the literal meanings of words either, is it? I mean, think about all the figurative language we use, metaphors, idioms, slang.
Exactly. Those can be some of the trickiest aspects of language to learn because the meaning isn't always clear from the individual words themselves. You have to kind of understand the cultural context and the way that those words are being used together.
Yeah, like if you say someone kicked the bucket, it doesn't mean they literally kicked a bucket, right?
Yeah.
It means they died.
Right. Idioms can be really confusing for language learners. And then there are things like collocations, which are words that just naturally go together.
Mhm.
Like you would say heavy rain, not strong rain, even though both heavy and strong could be used to describe something that has a lot of force.
Yeah, you just kind of learn those combinations through exposure and experience. So we've looked at grammar, we've looked at vocabulary, and now I think it's time to talk about how we actually use language in different situations. Because, of course, it's not just about knowing the rules and the words, it's about knowing how to put them together in a way that's effective and appropriate for the context.
Absolutely. And Harmer dedicates a whole section of his book to this idea of language and use. And one of the first things he talks about is the importance of understanding the purpose of communication. Like, why are you speaking or writing? What are you trying to achieve?
Right, because the way you use language is going to be very different if you're, say, giving a presentation at work versus chatting with friends over coffee.
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of appropriateness, which is about using language that's suitable for the specific situation. Like, who are you talking to?
Yeah.
What's the relationship between you? What's the setting? What's the topic? All of those factors play a role in determining what kind of language is appropriate.
Yeah, you wouldn't use the same level of formality when talking to your boss as you would with your best friend.
Right. And all of this ties into this broader idea of discourse, which is basically about how language is used to create meaning in a particular context. So it's not just about individual sentences, it's about how those sentences fit together to form a coherent conversation or piece of writing.
Like a conversation has its own flow and rhythm, and there are all sorts of unspoken rules that we follow, like how to take turns speaking, how to signal that we want to say something, how to respond to what someone else has said.
Exactly. And all of that is part of what makes communication effective. And then there's the idea of genre, which is about the different types of spoken and written texts that we encounter. So like a news report is going to have a very different structure and style than a personal letter, right?
Right, and those different genres often have their own specific conventions and expectations. Like, think about a recipe. It usually starts with a list of ingredients, then it gives you step-by-step instructions. You wouldn't expect to find a recipe that starts with a personal anecdote, would you?
Probably not. And recognizing those genre conventions can be really helpful for both understanding and producing different types of texts.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, there's the whole area of phonology, which is basically about the sounds of language.
Right. Things like intonation, stress, and the individual sounds that we use to form words. And these can be really important for conveying meaning, especially in spoken language.
Yeah, like think about how a change in intonation can completely change the meaning of a sentence. Like if you say, you're going, With a rising intonation, it sounds like a question. But if you say it with a falling intonation, it sounds like a statement.
Exactly. And those kinds of subtle cues can be really important for understanding what someone is trying to say.
Okay, so we've talked about language itself, its global reach, how we describe it, how we use it in different situations. Now let's shift our focus to the people who are learning it, the learners. And one of the things that Harmer really emphasizes is that everyone learns differently.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to language learning. And one of the biggest factors that influences how someone learns is their age.
Yeah.
Like, young children tend to learn language in a very different way than adults do.
Yeah, I mean, kids just seem to pick up languages so easily, almost effortlessly.
They do. And that's because their brains are still developing, and they're really good at absorbing new information, including language.
Hmm.
But as we get older, our brains become a bit less flexible, and we tend to rely more on our conscious analytical skills when we're learning.
So it might take us a bit longer to learn a new language as adults, but we can still do it.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of things that adult learners can do to make the process easier, like being aware of their own learning styles and finding strategies that work for them.
Right. Some people learn best by listening, others by reading, others by doing, and some people might be a combination of all of those.
Exactly. And Harmer talks about this idea of multiple intelligences, which is
Well,
basically the idea that people have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to learning. So like some people might be really good at learning languages, while others might be better at, say, math or music.
okay, so it's important to recognize those different strengths and find ways to incorporate them into the learning process. And of course, motivation is a huge factor in language learning, right?
It's huge.
Yeah.
If you're not motivated to learn, it's going to be really tough no matter how good your teacher is or what methods you use.
Yeah. And that's where the role of the teacher comes in, right?
Yeah.
They have to create a learning environment that's engaging and motivating.
Exactly. And Harmer talks about all the different roles that the teacher plays in the classroom. Like, they're not just a lecturer, they're also a facilitator, a counselor, a cheerleader, and sometimes even an entertainer.
Yeah, they have to wear a lot of hats. And speaking of teachers, let's talk a little bit about the different methodologies that are used in language teaching, because there's a lot of debate about the best way to teach a language.
Right. And Harmer goes into a lot of detail about different approaches, like the traditional presentation, practice, production method, which is still quite common. But he also talks about more communicative approaches that focus on getting students using the language for real-world purposes.
Okay, so instead of just drilling grammar rules, students are actually using the language to communicate and interact with each other.
Exactly. And that can be a much more engaging and effective way to learn. And then there are more specialized approaches, like the silent way and Suggestopedia, which use some pretty unique techniques to try to accelerate language learning.
Interesting. And of course, no matter what method you use, students are going to make mistakes. It's just part of the learning process.
It is.
Yeah.
And Harmer talks about the importance of providing feedback that's both corrective and encouraging, because you want to help students learn from their mistakes, but you also don't want to discourage them.
Right. It's about finding that balance between accuracy and fluency.
Exactly. And when it comes to classroom management, Harmer talks about the different ways that teachers can group students for different activities. Like, you can have whole class activities, pair work, group work, and independent work.
And each of those groupings has its own advantages and disadvantages.
Right, like whole class activities can be good for introducing new material or for getting everyone on the same page, but they don't give students much opportunity to practice speaking. Pair work and group work are great for that, but they can also be a bit more challenging to manage in terms of keeping students on task.
So it's really about choosing the right grouping for the right activity. And speaking of tools, Harmer also talks about the different kinds of teaching aids that teachers can use.
Right, everything from traditional things like blackboards and overhead projectors to more modern technology like computers and language labs.
And even just things like real-life objects, pictures, and music can be really helpful for bringing the language to life.
Absolutely. And finally, Harmer talks about the importance of learners taking an active role in their own learning. So encouraging them to study independently, to notice language patterns, and to develop their own learning strategies.
Yeah. It's about becoming a self-directed learner, not just relying on the teacher to spoon-feed everything to you.
Right, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it? Becoming a confident and competent user of the language.
I think so. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of English language teaching. And I think even for those of us who aren't teachers, there are a lot of valuable insights here about language learning and communication in general.
Absolutely. I mean, how often do we really stop and think about the complex process of language learning?
Not often enough, probably. So, to leave our listeners with something to ponder, how do you think the principles of effective language teaching might change in the future, given the rapid advancements in technology and the way that we communicate?
Hmm. Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, just think about how much things have already changed with the rise of the internet and things like language learning apps. It's really exciting to think about what the future holds for language learning.
It is. Well, we encourage all of our listeners to explore these ideas further and to continue their own deep dives into the fascinating world of language. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.